Okay, hi guys, we're back here for our second video on our fossils and geologic time unit. Yesterday, we did a little video and talked about the first type of fossils, and that is, there are two types. The first type we talked about yesterday was original remains, and if you'll remember, I'll show you a couple pictures here. We had mammoths and even humans that had frozen in ice and were found later, and this was actually actual body parts on them. Then we talked about how another way that you might be able to find original remains is to actually find insects or even small lizards, I think even maybe a little bird in plant sap, which is fossilized. It's amber now, it's not called amber. And then we also talked about the skeletal remains that they pulled out of the tar pits. So those are the ones that are in the shortest supply. So today we're going to talk about the second and the largest group of fossils that are found, and these are fossils that form in rocks. So guys, this is the second part to the answer on question 21. Okay, question 21 says, name the two general types of fossils. So your first answer is original remains, and your second one is fossils that form in rocks. Okay, so question 24 on your study guide says, in general, how do fossils form in rocks? So this is going to be your explanation for this. The organism or the trace of the organism must be preserved before it decomposes or disappears. And we're going to show you some examples of that here in just a little bit. That's your answer to 24. What kind of rocks do fossils form in, and how do they form? We just finished our unit on rocks. We've learned about igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. And the only rocks that you're going to find fossils forming in are sedimentary rocks. And this occurs when the organism is quickly buried by sediment that later becomes rock. That again is your answer on 25. So, organisms have a better chance of becoming a fossil if they have hard body parts. That's going to answer number 7. Such as bone, shell, or teeth. And I got to tell you, this picture is actually not of any of those. I'll come back and we'll use this picture in a few minutes when we're talking about one of the rock-forming fossils. But that is a big old, looks like a spider. And there are no bones, shell, or teeth on a spider. So the only way we can actually get this kind of a fossil of a spider is through something called a carbon film fossil. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. Okay, here's a nice picture. You'll see something that looks real similar to this on the lab that we do. It's just an old Nidia fish fossil from the Green River Formation. So now what I want to do is have us get the definitions for the 5 different types of rock-forming fossils. The first one, which is going to answer the definition on number 3, is a mold. And a mold is a visible shape that was left after an animal or plant was buried in sediment and then decayed. So it looks almost like an imprint of the body in the rock. And it goes hand in hand with number 4 on your study guide, a cast. It says some of the times the hollow mold later becomes filled with sediment or minerals, which then harden to form a solid model of the shape of the organism. And I have some examples I'm going to show to you after I finish going through the presentation. I have a really nice one of an ammonite that I'm going to show you here in just a few minutes. Molds fill with sediment that later become the cast. Here's a good example. This is the cast of a trilobite, and this is the mold. So this is like the imprint of the body it filled up, it was formed first when the organism was actually still in it, but as the organism died and decomposed, all that was left was this kind of hollowed out imprint. Later, sediment filled that in, and then now you have this three-dimensional shape called the cast of that fossil. What kind is this, Miss Whiteside?
Well, that looks like a mold.
That is definitely a mold. That's like an imprint. What about that one?
And that would be the cast.
Yeah, that's good. That's a cast, you bet. Okay, number 5 on your study guide is petrified wood. A lot of you have probably seen petrified wood. This is a beautiful photograph of one of the big logs that actually happens to be in the petrified forest in Arizona, and I'm so excited because I'm going to get to go see it this summer.
Oh, I'm jealous. I want to go there so
I'm
bad.
excited. All right, these are stone fossils of trees. They were once living cells of the trees that have been replaced with minerals which form rock that look like living trees. What has to happen is that these logs or trees had to have fallen into like a big stream and been covered up immediately with a lot of sediment. So as it decomposed slowly, as the parts that were actually living parts decomposed, they were filled in, each of the little cells were filled in with minerals, which then gives you, that's actually a stone. You couldn't pick that up, that's a big old heavy rock, but if you can see, you can actually see that the outside still looks like there's bark on it. And here's another photo. I just think these are really cool because these are huge. All right, here is the number 6 on your study guide, a carbon film fossil. This fossil forms sometimes when a dead plant or animal decays and its carbon is left behind as a visible layer on the stone. Carbon films can show soft parts of plants and animals that are rarely seen in other fossils. Both of these are carbon film fossils, and you can see tiny little leaflets on ancient ferns. Now I'm going to go back to this picture of the spider again. That is definitely a carbon film fossil because this guy doesn't have any hard parts on him. But it looks like somebody drew a magic picture of it with a magic marker, but that is actually the carbon that was once in that spider's body that's deposited on that rock. Okay, and then the 5th type of rock forming fossil are the trace fossils, and this is going to be number 7 on your study guide. These fossils are not part of an animal or its impression, but they are any evidence of an animal's presence in a given location. Examples would be dinosaur footprints, that's what I've got right here, animal holes, and something called a coprolite, which is a nice polite way of talking about a petrified animal poo. And I actually have a picture of that, a really big one too.
That's a big
I took
poo.
that photograph at one of the Tulsa Gem and Mineral Society shows that they have in the summer, and the thing's about the size of a basketball. So there were some big animals back then, okay? Now, it's no longer poo. There's nothing there that's poo. It's all rock now. And this is basically tracks. And these tracks were made by a rock. They weren't made by an animal. But oftentimes there are rocks that have little squiggly kind of lines in them, and they are made, those little tracks are made from some sort of soft-bodied creature. As a matter of fact, I've got one I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. All right. Now, there are 2 other ways that we can learn something about life in the past other than fossils, okay? The first one, and by the way, this is going to help you answer question 26 on your study guide, is we can look at tree rings. And a lot of you have probably seen, especially after we have like an ice storm or something like that and limbs fall off trees, people start cutting them down. you can see the rings inside the tree stem. It says the width of the living tree rings tells us about past weather conditions. Thick rings indicate plentiful rainfall, and thin rings indicate dry years. And the other thing we can use are ice cores from glaciers. These are tubular samples that show the layers of snow and ice that have built up over thousands of years. Scientists can actually analyze air that has been trapped in the ice to learn how the atmosphere has changed. When we studied volcanoes, one of the things we did is we talked about how some very big, huge, damaging volcanoes occurred at different times in the past. And one of the ways we know that is when we look at an ice core, you'll see this layering effect. We can actually find volcanic ash in some of these, and there's a way to figure out how many years ago that occurred. There are tiny little bubbles of the atmosphere that were trapped in this ice when it was formed. Okay, and I wanted to just go back for a second and show you this nice big tree ring here, or this trunk. You know, these larger rings are times when there was more rain and the tree grew faster. And these little skinny ones here, you can see maybe there wasn't quite as much rain during those years. All right, I'm gonna turn on the light and we're gonna look at some samples now. Okay, so let me show. Here is a nice shark tooth, and there's no part of the shark left of that, but that is a really good example of a cast. And then here is another one. This is an ammonite. You can see it's like basically a three-dimensional shape of this critter that lived in the ocean hundreds of millions of years ago. And by the way, I collected this very sample from southern Oklahoma. And this was a organism that lived in the ocean. So it's a pretty good indication that at one point in our past, a large part of Oklahoma was at the bottom of the ocean. Okay. Here is something called a trilobite. And they're about 450 million years ago old. They also were very abundant on pretty much all over the planet until something pretty much killed them off almost all at once. It was not, they were already extinct well before the dinosaurs ever came around. So it wasn't from the same thing that killed the dinosaurs. That's also a cast. Now I've got another one here, and if you'll look, you can see that this little trilobite, this is the cast, but this was the mold that it formed in, or at least part of the mold, and it's real hard. You hardly ever find both the cast and the mold of a fossil because they're separated way too easily. So this is kind of a special little thing that I've got here. Here is a really nice sample of a carbon film fossil. This is a big leaf is what it was. And as you can see, it's kind of a dark colored stuff. It looks like it's somebody's taken a marker and drawn that on there. But that was actually the carbon that was deposited by a leaf after it decomposed.
You can even see the veins.
Well, and you can see where like insects have nibbled on the sides too. Okay, and then here is a nice piece of petrified wood. You can tell this is this is a rock. There's no part of this that is wood anymore. Okay, and the last rock forming fossil I've got is a trace fossil, and this is a piece of sandstone that I collected about probably, I don't know, about 10 miles north of here, up by the Hard Rock Casino. And this is sandstone, and this has been dated at, I believe, 325 million years old. And I was with a group of geologists and teachers that did this. All these little bitty squiggly marks here are trace fossils. That is where back before this turned into a rock, when it was just wet sand laying on the ground, some little soft-bodied creature just squiggled across there and left this little track in there. And then it got covered up and basically kind of sealed it into that shape. That's kind of like the footprint of a dinosaur, or even the coprolite that I showed you just a moment ago. And there are going to be other fossils for you to look at when we do our 2-day fossil lab. Okay?
I love fossils.
Me too.
It's so fascinating.
I agree. Me too. All right. Thanks a lot.